I'm Janisha.
Hey, everybody. I'm Kahari.
And this is
Village Talk, a podcast for awesome families where we discuss all things awareness, acceptance, and mental health.
So tonight, I'm really excited about this episode. We are going to be talking about one of the most important things in life, and that is grief. We're going to discuss how we deal with grief, how we coped with our children being diagnosed, and just all of the stages of grief.
Yeah, and we do have a wonderful guest tonight, Miss Marcia Mack.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Of course, the owner of Blue Anthony's
Yes.
LLC.
Yes.
And author of God Over Grief. Introduce yourself.
All right. Hello, everybody. I am Marcia, grief coach of Blue Anthony's and author of God Over Grief. And what I do is empower those who are grieving to rebuild everything that grief tore down.
Yes, love that. So this is a really good subsequent episode because last week we talked so much about mental health and how we dealt with it and the therapy side of things. But this week we get to focus on grief and how, grief coaching could, help us in a positive way. So first, what is the difference? And this is important. What is the difference between a grief coach and a therapist?
All right. First, let me say that both are beneficial to anyone who is struggling with grief. If you look at it with comparison with researching, one is future-based and one is past-based. Grief coaching is more future-based. We focus on the what now in grief coaching, whereas therapy focuses on the why. Also, it is a behavioral thing. Grief coaching is an action to get you from being unstuck from grief, whereas therapy sort of gets you to a functioning state and gets you to be able to deal with the emotional part of grief, kind of only. They're both, again, very beneficial. One focuses on the healing and one focuses on moving past your struggles that you're having and being, again, in that stuck position where you don't know what to do, how to move forward, and grief coaching helps you with that. Absolutely.
So as you can see, it's a very thin line, but it's a big difference between a grief coach and a therapist. I feel like you need both.
Yes, and also let me add this. When it comes to therapy is very, very good for complicated grief or absent grief, where you're sort of like in a denial stage or where you are just not accepting the loss or whatever loss that you're dealing with, and your grief is complicated, like you're stuck and you can't get unstuck. You don't even know what being unstuck looks like. You definitely want to see a therapist. That's when depression is setting in, anxiety is at an all-time high. You can get post-traumatic stress disorder, when you're dealing with grief, and that is definitely where a therapist comes in.
Yes. Okay. All right. So can we talk about what are the 5 stages of grief, or is it 5 stages?
Yeah. Okay. Technically, according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, there are 5 stages of grief. However, she did something with David Kessler that added the 6th stage of grief, which I feel like is just amazing. So with the 5 stages of grief, you have denial, you have anger, you have bargaining, you have depression, and you have acceptance. Okay. Now, people for years with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, they just thought, and you don't grieve in that chronological order, but they thought acceptance is when you're like, that's it, that's the end all, like I'm good. No. David Kessler said finding meaning is the 6th stage. Because now that you've accepted it, grief coaching, now what? We have to find meaning. We have to find a new sense of normalcy. We have to get out there and find what is going to help us to become a better person and to live to our fullest potential without that loss. Yes. So you have to find meaning.
Yes. I think the first stage that I went through is definitely denial, because it started so early. I started noticing changes in my child. I was really in denial, like, okay, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? No, it's not. This is not what's happening. Like, no, there's nothing wrong with my baby. There is absolutely nothing wrong with my baby. We have to get this together. No. So I really was in denial. That was definitely my first stage of grief. What about you, Kay?
Do you feel like you experience all of the stages, or was it like a couple that like stood out most?
I did not experience depression, and it's thanks to my family. I always shout my family out, hence we are the village, because it takes a village to raise a child, including me. My family really had my back. Like, I really did not. I did not go through depression at all, because my family was my rock, and they made sure that they stayed on me, and they kept me uplifted and positive, and they kept speaking positivity into me and my child, and they let us know that we are going to get through this together. So I did not go through depression, but all of the rest of them I did go through.
Yeah. I feel like, and maybe I'm tripping, I don't know, but I feel like what stands out most to me is the anger and the depression. Like, that's what I went through.
Yes.
I think now, a year and some change later, I'm coming to a point where I'm starting to accept and making steps to like find meaning in the situation. But I mean, for the bulk of the time, I felt heavy on the depression and heavy on the anger.
Yes, definitely angry. I think I'm still angry to this day.
Really?
Like, I am. I still just be mad. Like, I don't understand. But I do understand, you know. But it's just, I still have that anger in me that I know I need to talk to a grief coach.
I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, oh, okay. You say that you're angry. Okay.
Yes,
I was getting ready to get into my coaching, like, okay, and where's this anger stemming from? Like, if you could put a name to it, if I had to. This podcast, I'm not in no coaching session.
I can put a name right to it, but I ain't. That's for another episode, though. But I definitely do experience. I definitely have experienced anger, and I'm still going through that sign of grief right now.
Yeah. Now, now I know that it's nothing that you can put a number on, but what do you think that time frame looks like? What makes sense? Like, how long should a person stay in each stage, or does it just differ person to person?
Grief is a very unique thing, and it is designed specifically for that individual. There is no specific route that you take with grief. Grief is an up and down roller coaster. There is no, even though the 5 stages are listed the way that they are, that's just the way that she listed them. That is not the way that each person will go through it. You don't start with denial and then you go to anger. That's only in a perfect world. Grief is nothing perfect about grief. You also you want to make sure that you're grieving in your own time frame. You don't put a limit to your grief, because then you'll always find yourself being set back because you're setting unrealistic expectations for yourself. But if you look at it again from the research, study shows that the first year of grief, getting over that, is very good. A very good time frame, so to speak, to where you've dealt with all of the significant dates. However, people really grieve for like the first to 5 years. 1 to 5 years is a normal. But grief is defined. Let's get what the definition of grief is. Grief is defined as a normal reaction to a loss. And what people don't realize is it's a normal reaction. So it's normal for you to grieve for 5 years, 10 years, whatever your grief looks like for you.
I think that's super important, and that just kind of hit me, because sometimes I feel like I don't give myself like enough grace, and I know I'm not the only person that feels like this, but I feel like I don't give myself enough grace. Like, I feel like, okay, it's been this long, I should be over this, but I'm not. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so it was really good hearing that and you confirming that I'm tripping.
I think I was going over our outline with someone, and they were like, grief? Why are y'all talking about grief? Like, that doesn't have anything to do with your child being diagnosed. And we having this episode, and I can't wait for them to listen to what we're saying.
Absolutely.
Because I told them to watch the podcast, and you'll understand why we're talking about grief, because everybody goes through it. And it's whatever happens in your life. You grieve, whether it's good grief or bad grief. And can it be good grief?
Let me put an emphasis on the person, or to just answer the question to what the person said. Again, grief by definition is a normal reaction to a loss. Well, what is a loss, Marcia? A loss of any kind. Divorce, your health, your loved one, your job. anything that you lose that causes you to have a reaction, an emotional reaction to it, a normal emotional reaction to it, is grief. We are grieving right now in the middle of this pandemic. Our sense of normalcy has been stripped away. We have to wear face masks. We have to get these shots. You know, we have to social distance. We're grieving because we can't go outside. It was a point we couldn't go outside.
Yes.
The world was shut down.
Yes.
So we grieved over that.
Yes.
We grieved over it. And I can't say that there's a good or bad, because when I think of grief, if I'm having the emotions that you deal with when you deal with grief are typically bad. You know, because if I crash my car, I'm not happy about that, you know. But grief to me is connected, and by definition connected to a loss, which is typically something that causes unwanted emotions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and I want to talk about acceptance. I think that is one of my favorite parts of this grieving process. Acceptance. I didn't have a hard time accepting my son's diagnosis. Still right now I don't have a hard time. It's very easy for me to talk about autism and autism awareness. What hurt me the most was that we didn't have any resources. I didn't know what to do after I accepted my child's diagnosis, but I had nowhere to go after accepting this. It wasn't, we really just did not have enough resources, and that's really what confused me, and that made me have to go out and do my own research and outsource to the neighborhoods outside of Gary. And even though we're in close distance, it's just not the same, because a lot of people can't do, a lot of people can't outsource outside of Gary. I'm sorry, let me repeat that. Because a lot of people can't outsource outside of Gary. It wasn't easy. And that's why I started my company, so that we can live in our acceptance.
Yeah.
Live in our acceptance.
So do you think that was the hardest part of your process? Finding resources in this area?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think if I had never been hit with a challenge, then I'll still be like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. I was so determined to make sure that I am so determined to make sure that my child is independent. And I know I can't do it by myself. I know my family didn't even know anything about autism. So I had to get out in these streets, like, who knows about autism? I need we need to talk about it.
And we talked about that a couple episodes ago, just how you can't turn to to your point, the hardest part for me in my process was not having supportive people around me.
Yes.
Wow.
When my daughter, we talked about last week, my daughter, we were hit with 3 diagnoses within a year.
Wow.
And, throughout that whole process, and even before the diagnosis, I didn't have family support or people like, oh, okay, well, this is what we need to do. Or, I had people coming back at me like, she ain't got that, she ain't got this, everything. So that, for me, was the hardest part of the whole entire process.
Right.
And
I know family support is definitely rare. You don't find it anywhere. You don't find it up. And I know family support is definitely rare. You don't find it commonly. A lot of people are rebuttals. They want to say, oh no, they'll grow out of it and this and that. So I definitely understand, you going through that. And that's why it takes a village to raise a child. You have to have your people's back. You have to be there for one another. We can't do anything alone. You have to be there.
Support is definitely a necessity when you're dealing with grief.
Yes.
So I feel like we hit on how grief has affected us and, around our diagnosis, but I think it's also important for people to know that grief does come in different forms.
Yes.
Do you mind sharing your story and how Blue Anthony's came about? And your struggle with grief?
Absolutely. So, how Blue Anthony's was founded is in October of 2019. My father was murdered in a hit and run. And let's take it back. In April of 2019, my stepbrother was in a car crash off of Birch Street, and that he died from that. And 6 months later, October 2019, my father was in a fatal accident, and he died from that. Okay. So then we fast forward 9 months later, my daughter's father was murdered, and once my dad died, I was angry. I was very, very angry. I'm not going to say I didn't understand, because I have a relationship with God and I understood what was going on and I accepted what happened. But I know my scripture and what God says, and I know He won't put more on me than what I can bear. So I'm like, okay, what's the purpose of this? What is the purpose of this? And I said, okay, I'm going to be able to help others who are dealing with grief. And so I found purpose out of my pain.
Yes.
And so that's my story. That's how my grief journey started. And that's what pushed me to be able to create a business where I'm pouring into people who have empty cups.
Yes.
Your cup is very empty when you're dealing with grief.
Yes.
It's very lonely at the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay.
We talked about isolation.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
it is.
yes. And so that is my background,
Yeah.
of how I started my business.
Yeah.
I just love motivation. I love
Yeah.
motivation, good or bad motivation. We didn't soak in it, you know. We didn't drown in the tribulations that we faced. We're going out and
Almost
doing
did,
it
I don't
head
know.
first. But you're here for her, and I tell you all the time, I'm so proud of her, and I'm so glad that she is my co-host, because she's such a strong mother. She fights
She
for her
is.
child so hard, and if don't nobody see that, you know, we do.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate you for being a good mother,
Thank
because
you.
it's a lot of mothers that's still on step one in grief, and that's denial, you know, and their children are 6 and 7 years old.
Yeah.
I see it every day. I get phone calls every day of mothers whose children have they don't have any guidance at all, any structure at all, because they haven't been put in any program up until now. It's time for them to go to school, and now when it's time for them to go to school, it's too late.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
They're
it's
not
too
ready.
late, and it takes a lot for us to try to, for me or anybody, a teacher, to try to get your child on track. You know, when you have neglected the fact that they had this diagnosis for so long, any diagnosis, whether it's ADHD, whether it's autism, whether it's cerebral palsy, you know, whatever it is that you are facing with your child, face it head on. You know, you are your child's first voice. You have to be able to speak up for them, and if you don't do it, nobody is.
That's
if you,
facts.
as their parent, don't do it, nobody is going to do it. So I'm very proud of you for being such a strong mother and such a strong advocate for your child.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yes, I am too.
Same
You
to
are.
y'all, both of y'all. Y'all are both
It's
awesome
a lot
mamas.
of strength at this table, and I'm feeling it.
Yes, yes. Okay, so can you give us some tips on how to get past grief or how to deal with grief?
Yes, I go by pray. Pray. Number one, for pray. You want to make sure that you are praying and make sure that you are meditating on the Word of God. I don't run from it. I don't hide from it. When people ask me, that is what helped me overcome my grief or deal with my grief. So you have to make sure that you are getting invested into your Word and leaning to the source of your strength itself. Okay, and then also you want to reach out to somebody for help, like a grief coach, right? or a grief therapist. But you definitely want to get resources. You want to reach out to somebody. You want to have a strong support system to help you to understand exactly what grief is, exactly what it is you're going through. In order to be able to deal with grief, you have to be sure you know what emotions you're dealing with. You have to know what it is you're dealing with. You have this is important. You always want to make sure that you are providing yourself with some sort of self-care, whether it be a spa, taking some time out, 15 minutes,
Look at it, right?
go
Yes.
sit in a car. You know, you have to make sure that you are taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
Always do self-care. And then that brings us to another one of my favorites. Why? You have to journal. You have to journal. We bottle in so many different emotions, and even if you talk to that grief specialist, you're not going to tell them everything that you are feeling. It's just in human nature to withhold certain emotions. But once you put pen to paper and it's you, that pen and God, you pour out from a different part of your body and you get it all out. So that is like very, very important to me.
Yes,
You know,
That's what I use.
My favorite, I love that. I love the acronym and how you give multiple steps, because it ain't just like a one step thing. We need every single one of them. And you know, my favorite one, and I feel like me and Johnny, before we even started the podcast, we talked about this. Pray is my absolute favorite practical way to get yourself up and get yourself going. When I tell you guys, like, I feel like I talked about it with both of y'all. I went, over a year being depressed. It just soaking, just me, you know what I'm saying? When I know where my strength come from, you know what I'm saying? And it feels like as soon as and it was actually around the time of the Paint Your Grief Away event.
Okay.
When I took everything that I was feeling and gave it to the Most High,
Yes.
I literally felt, I promise y'all, I cannot make this up. I literally felt like everything has been lifted off of my shoulders. And now, and that's literally just been the last maybe like 3 months. And I feel peace on like a totally different level.
Yes. And I feel like we as mothers, it hits us hard, you know. Because
absolutely.
we bear children, we creating these kids, and we're expecting to get the perfect child, and we don't. We're like, oh, what did we do wrong? What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? You know, you can't beat yourself up about anything that happens in your child's life, because it's more so genetics. It's something that you can't do. It's something that you had no control over. Most of the time, it's something that you had no control over. And I just want us mothers out there to stop beating yourself up.
And not only that, but I feel like, and this is me speaking to myself, you know what I'm saying? I feel like I set these expectations that wasn't even meant for me to be setting. You know what I'm saying? Like, I put these expectations on my kid, like, oh, she gonna come out like this, she gonna do this, and she gonna do that. When really, only person who could decide that is God. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So just stay in your humanly body, like, and let
your fleshly life.
Okay. Yes. So expectations. That's very important too.
Alrighty. Before we go, I want you to talk about your company and where we can find you and where we could get one of the best grief coaches out here.
Okay. Absolutely. Well, you can find me on Facebook at Blue Anthony, BLEU. It's not BLUE. BLEUANTHONY. That is on Facebook, and you can find me on Instagram, BLEUANTHONY_. That name, my father's name was Anthony. His favorite color was blue, so that name is very personal to me, and that's where it came from. And you can go to my website at blueanthony.org, same spelling, .org, and check out my services. You can check out my event that's coming up. My event, okay, let me talk about that for a second. I'll steal the show for a second. So I have a grief journal here. This is a prayer journal, and it's called Prayer Journal. It's called Guide Over Grief, What to Pray When Grief Has Your Tongue. I have an event coming out April 23rd, and it's from 1 to 4. You can go on blueanthony.org to purchase your ticket and to get other information about the event. This is a very powerful journal that God gave me. This is going to bless so many people who are grieving, and it's small but powerful prayers to get you through. People sometimes feel like when it comes to grief that we have to talk to God, and it's this long, lengthy conversation. No. I would say, God, I need you. I can't do this on my own. Lord, please help me. I need you. I need you. I need you. Simple. And God hears that. You get talking longer ain't gonna make them come no faster, you know. But that's what this journal is. It's powerful, and the journal, to have you write that stuff down, get that stuff out, because the grief will kill you. It will kill you. It can. This is a whole nother podcast topic, but grief can cause so many different health issues that you don't want those problems. So yeah, this is very powerful, and that is it. That is it for me, guys. Oh, let me give you guys some takeaways. What I want you to do. Right.
Well, in addition to that, what is one thing, one piece of advice, anything that you can give to the audience when dealing with grief, especially around experiencing a diagnosis of any sort?
I had 2 things. Be kind to yourself. Be gentle. And this is the same thing. Give yourself grace. It's a real situation that you're going through. Be kind to yourself. Celebrate the small wins. The small wins. And the second one is, you can't skip the struggle. You can't skip the struggle.
Yes, that's some fact.
You cannot skip the process of grief.
The whole thing, I know I said we was gonna go, but be kind to yourself.
Yeah,
I think that's gonna be one of my quotes I live by.
Yeah.
Because like I said, we beat ourselves up so much. Be kind to yourself. I love that. Yes. Yeah.
And I got one more thing before I go, guys, because this is what I do. I love talking about grief, and it took a lot to get there. You can get through it. You can do it. It starts here first. It starts with your mind first. Tell yourself what it is you want out of this grief, and you can have it, like she was saying, you know, and I was explaining to her what grief is and how it's a normal emotional reaction to a loss. And she asked me, is there such thing as good grief? I can't say that. From my experience, I don't think I've experienced good grief. However, there is some good that can come from your grief if you allow it. Turn that pain into purpose so that you can prosper and you can just do this thing called life, because that's what we were created to do and that's what we're here for. And that's it for me.
Yes. Well, I am Janisha.
I'm Kahari.
And this is Village Talk.